Welcome to day one of the 50-day sketchbook challenge brought to you by sketchbooknation.com. I'm Matt, and I'm going to be joining you on your journey here, your drawing journey, to learning how to draw by putting basic shapes together. We're going to start by drawing a bee, and we're going to start with three basic shapes. We're going to draw an oval for the abdomen, a basic circle for the middle part of the bee, and then somewhat of an organic shape for the head of the bee. We're going to draw very loosely here at the beginning. I'm using an HB pencil, or I recommend that you use an HB pencil. I'm drawing on a graphics tablet here. We're also going to draw a couple of shapes for the wings. Now these shapes are a little bit more complex, but still easily manageable. You may notice I'm drawing several lines to produce these shapes. It's recommended to do so. If you try to draw one line, you'll probably not find the right line, but if you draw several lines, you have a better chance of finding that right line. So we're going to draw very loosely here. It may be a good idea to try to draw with your shoulder instead of trying to draw with your wrist. A lot of times when we draw with our wrist, we have less control, but if we can move our entire shoulder and try to get our whole arm into the mark, it's a little bit easier to find that accurate mark. Alright, now that we've got our wings on the paper, we're going to move on down to the legs. I'm going to draw an oval coming right out of the bottom of the abdomen. Then we're going to draw another shape. This one's a little bit more complex, but still manageable, for the middle part of the hind leg. And the way the bee's standing, we're only going to have to draw one of those hind legs here. Now let's draw one of those middle legs, and we're just going to put shapes together here again. We'll start by drawing a pretty simple shape, almost an oval that comes down. And then we'll have a couple of lines that come off of that, kind of bow out and then go back down, almost like the arm of a person. Now we can see a bit of the front leg on the other side of the bee, just the bottom portion of it sticking down from the middle part of the bee. So we'll draw a shape for that. Now we're ready to move on to the shape for the eyes, and bees have big eyes proportionally speaking to their head. So we're going to draw a big shape for that. And because the bee is standing in this particular posture, we'll only see the right eye of the bee. And we'll add a couple of angular shapes here for the antenna. Again, very loose lines, drawing with our whole arm, trying to pull that line out. And don't be too concerned if it's not perfectly accurate. Remember, we're going to be able to clean all this up here at the very last stage. We're going to go over the top of it with our permanent lines. Then we'll erase all the extra lines that we don't need anymore. Maybe we'll put a couple of shapes for the mandible here, and we'll draw some feet on the bee. I'm not sure if these are actually called feet, but it's the bottom part of the legs of the bee. And we're going to make some angular segments down here, and that will help it make it look a bit more realistic. And then there's just one more of those feet that come off the back of the hind leg here. So we're just going to pull a couple lines down and create a shape, something like this. Alright, every bee, as you know, has some stripes. So we're just going to draw a couple of guidelines here for where our stripes are going to be, and they should curve around the cross contours of the bee. So they should come out and then down and then back in just slightly. If we tried to make those lines straight, it would make the bee look flat, and we want the bee to look round. So that's how we're going to approach it, with a curved contour line. Alright, now at this point we can go ahead and take our heavy material, whether that be a softer graphite pencil where you can make some darker marks, or if that's ink, in this case I'm simulating ink here, and I'm just going to draw right over the top of my sketchy lines that I've created, and we're going to clean up the drawing now. So I'm going to go very dark here, just color in that entire antenna. Now it might be hard to tell when you look at a bee, but bees are actually furry, so we want to create that furry texture around the outside of the bee. So we're going to draw lines that kind of pull out from that shape that we defined before, and it's going to translate as hair in our drawing. So we're not going to actually draw an outline per se. Instead, we're going to allow that furry texture that we create with the mark to kind of give that illusion of the edge of the bee. We'll go ahead and color in the other antenna as well, nice and dark, create some strong contrast there. And this is the time when you're going to clean up any issues that might have arisen in your original sketch, especially if you're using ink to do your final drawing, because you'll be able to erase all the lines underneath. Now, hopefully in the early stages you did draw light with perhaps an HB pencil. So we'll continue that furry mark all the way around the outside of the head of the bee, and we'll draw a couple of defining lines here for the mandible. And it looks like earlier on in the drawing we forgot about the other mandible that might be visible, so we'll go ahead and draw a couple shapes for it on the other side. And the eye is very important, so we're going to go around the outside edge of the eye with that furry texture. And then we're going to go ahead and color in the eye black. But it's very important to understand the eye is a reflective surface, so we're going to have some highlights in there. So what I like to do is just draw out the highlights and plan out where those highlights are going to be. That way when I go in with the ink, I know not to color in those spots. So once we've got our highlights defined, now we can go back in and make everything nice and dark and have that really strong area of contrast right next to that highlight. So when you're planning out where your highlights are going to be in an eye, any type of eye, whether it's a bee's eye or another animal's eye or even a human eye, it's a good idea to make those highlight shapes a little bit larger than you think you might need. You can always go back and fill them in, but if you fill up too much of the space with darker value, it's going to be really hard to go back and fix those highlights. So we'll finish off the head of the bee there, and let's go ahead and move on to the outline of the wings. Now the wings have a little bit of a different texture, so we're going to create smoother lines here. And we're going to put a little bit less pressure on our pen or pencil, whatever tool you're using here, to create some thinner lines. We want the wings to translate as being almost transparent, so we don't want that outline or that contour to be really strong. So we can have a little bit of variety of the lines that we put on the inside part of the wing here, as we're creating a little bit of veins and patterns and all those things that happen on the inside of a wing of a bee. I'm not sure if there's veins in there or not. There's definitely some patterns and textures that are happening there. So we'll just put a few lines to indicate that. We'll continue our furry texture, of course, around the body of the bee. And again, no outlines per se, just we're allowing that furry texture to create the edge. Go ahead and tackle that second wing here. Again, thinner lines. Now when you have thick lines and then you have thinner lines and you have a variety of line in your drawing, that's called line quality. And you really want to have a variety of line quality in your drawing. So in other words, you want to have some lines that are thick and some lines that are thin, and that variety is really going to make your drawing a lot stronger. Typically, objects that are thicker are going to have thicker lines logically. Another place where you might put thicker lines is on areas of shadow on the underside of the subject that you're drawing or anything like that. So look for opportunities to vary that line quality. Have some thick lines and some thin lines. All right, now that we've got that second wing out of the way, we'll go ahead and continue the fur around the middle part of the body. We'll let that line get a little bit longer on the underside of the bee, just to kind of create a little bit of gravity in there. It's not going to make a huge difference, but... And then, of course, on the legs, we'll continue our harder edged lines. Now, the legs are going to be dark, at least at the top part of the leg, they're going to be dark. And again, the legs almost have a plastic look about them, so they're also going to be reflective. So we're going to have a couple of areas of highlight. In this first leg, you might not see too much of a highlight there. It's over on the opposite side of the B, and maybe the light source is coming from the left side. Not defining it very clearly in this other than the highlights. We'll go ahead and draw the lines for our middle leg here, and on this one we'll go ahead and define a shape for the highlight. Remember, you want to do this right from the start because you can always go back and fill in areas if you made the highlight area too big, but if you made the highlight area too small to begin with, you really can't go back and change that. So we'll let our light source come from the left side, and that's where our light will be hitting the leg, creating that highlight. And then we'll create a couple lines here to indicate a joint down here where the two parts of the leg come together. And we'll go ahead and fill that bottom part of the leg in with a nice dark value. And again, we're going to be looking for opportunities to vary that line quality. So even when we're creating a highlight, that could be considered a line. So that's another good opportunity to have some variation of line in your drawing. Maybe we'll just let that little piece stand out there and be somewhat of a highlight on the opposite side. And we'll go ahead and finish off the foot. We're going to go ahead and call it a foot. Now you can see here I'm kind of changing the shape of the abdomen a little bit there with my initial line. You'll see that a little bit clearer here when we finish the drawing, but in this stage when you're going back over the top with ink, or at least your final medium, you can make any adjustments to your initial sketch. So moving forward here, don't put too much pressure on yourself when you're creating that initial sketch. Each step of the process, you're just getting closer and closer to the final result, the final drawing. And since I'm just filling in the dark value here, I'm going to go ahead and speed this process up just a bit for you so you don't have to just sit and watch me fill in space. That's easy enough. I am leaving just a couple of specks of highlight on that lower leg, or the lower part of the leg. I'm going to leave a little bit of a larger highlight down there. Now the bottom pieces of the feet are not dark, so keep that in mind so we can have that contrast there. Alright, we'll continue our fur texture, which is really fun to draw, especially on this B here, going back around the abdomen. And this is where I'm going to change the shape just slightly. You can see my original drawing, that oval shape was a little bit larger. It came down a little bit further underneath, so I'm just going to make a slight change to that shape. Now these wings are transparent, so we might be able to see some of that fur through the transparent wings, but the line's going to get a little lighter. So to create that illusion, you can just make the line a little bit thinner if you're using medium like ink. And now we'll go ahead and do those stripes, and of course in the transparent section, those stripes on the B are not going to be very thick, so we'll make those lines nice and thin. And on the back part of the abdomen, they're going to be nice and thick, so put a lot of pressure down on that pen and make some nice bold lines. Again, they're following the cross contours here. We're just not making lines haphazardly. Instead, we're kind of following the direction that the body of the B would flow backwards towards the tail end of the B. We're also going to leave a little bit of white space in between each line, and that will kind of help create the illusion of fur a little bit further. And just a couple more lines of stripes here, and we'll have this drawing finished up. And those little breaks make a big difference in creating that illusion of fur. And once that last stripe is finished up, all that's left to do is make any finishing touch-ups that need to be touched up, and then we can erase the pencil lines that we originally made with our initial sketch, especially if you used ink to finish the drawing. And that brings us to the end of day 1 of the 50-day sketchbook challenge. I hope you enjoyed day 1, and I hope you're looking forward to day number 2. I'll see you then.